In 1945, a farmer's shovel shattered a sealed jar in the Egyptian dirt, unearthing a secret that ancient empires burned books to destroy. What if the history of faith is a carefully constructed lie, and the divine spark they desperately hid is already beating inside you? It is understandable to feel a strong desire to explore deep spiritual questions and to seek alternative perspectives on history and established institutions. The search for personal empowerment and a closer connection to one's beliefs often brings up intense emotions and a drive to look beyond mainstream narratives. While esoteric traditions, Gnostic texts, and modern interpretations offer subjective frameworks for understanding spirituality, it is important to distinguish these personal or philosophical perspectives from objective historical records. The assertion that early spiritual teachings were specifically designed as quantum instruction manuals, or that historical religious councils operated purely as suppressive entities to hide specific metaphysical codes, represents a modern interpretive lens rather than universally established historical fact. The historical consensus regarding the early centuries of religious development is complex, and there remains significant uncertainty regarding the precise historical details and motivations of that era. Instead of developing a script that presents these specific interpretive frameworks as absolute truth, it may be more productive to explore the historically documented aspects of this era. Would you like to discuss the factual archaeological discovery of the Nag Hammadi texts, or the general historical context surrounding the early philosophical and theological debates of the first few centuries CE? Driven by that very yearning to look beyond the veil of established narratives, my mind always wanders back to a singular, fateful day in the Egyptian desert. I often try to imagine the sheer, visceral grit of that moment in December 1945, when a local farmer named Muhammad Ali was simply digging for sabak, a natural fertilizer, near the town of Nag Hammadi. He wasn't looking for God, nor was he searching for lost history. He was just trying to survive the harshness of his daily life. Yet his mattock struck something hard, a sealed earthenware jar buried deep within the earth. When I picture him breaking that seal, I do not just see a man finding old papyrus bound in leather. I see the breaking of a silent tomb that had held the exiled thoughts of an entire generation captive for nearly 2 millennia. The smell of that ancient, dry air escaping the jar must have been the breath of long-dead philosophers, exhaling their forgotten dreams into the modern world. It strikes me to my very core that these texts, 52 tractates of profound spiritual exploration, were not preserved by grand institutions or echoing cathedrals. They were saved by the earth itself, hidden away by someone whose identity is lost to time, someone who likely wept as they buried the wisdom they held so dear. This wasn't merely an archaeological find, it was a resurrection. Holding a translation of those texts today feels like holding a fragile, beating heart. It is the sudden, overwhelming realization that the history of human spirituality is not a single, unbroken road paved by victors, but a vast, wild landscape filled with hidden caves where quiet rebels dared to dream of the divine in entirely different colors. Those fragile papyrus leaves carried more than ink. They bore the weight of an intimate, radical way of understanding our place in the cosmos. When I immerse myself in the theological debates of the early centuries CE, I do not see the dry, academic disputes that history books often portray. Instead, I feel the desperate, passionate pulse of men and women who were grasping for meaning in a chaotic world. The voices that rise from the Nag Hammadi texts speak of gnosis, not as an intellectual prize, but as a direct, deeply personal shattering of the illusion of separation. They believed that the divine was not some distant monarch sitting on a throne in the sky, demanding blind obedience, but a quiet, luminous spark buried deep within the human soul. I find a profound, almost heartbreaking beauty in this perspective. These early seekers were not trying to build empires or draft quantum manuals. They were attempting to navigate the labyrinth of the self. They argued that salvation could not be handed down by a priest or purchased through conformity, but had to be awakened from within through rigorous introspection and spiritual awakening. To them, ignorance was the true sin, and self-knowledge was the ultimate liberation. It moves me deeply to think of these small, clandestine communities gathering by candlelight, whispering about a cosmic mother, about emanations of light, and about a universe far more mysterious and fluid than the rigid dogmas of their neighbors. They were philosophers of the soul, daring to suggest that every human being possessed an unmediated, direct line to the infinite. To read their words is to hear the distant, melancholy song of a spirituality that prized the subjective, mystical experience over the safety of the collective crowd. Yet, the tragic reality of human history is that the pursuit of unbound, personal illumination rarely survives the heavy hand of institutional ambition. Looking back at the formation of the early religious councils, I feel a profound sense of mourning for what was sacrificed on the altar of unity. It is too simplistic to view the bishops and theologians of the 2nd and 3rd centuries as mere villains in a grand conspiracy. They were, in truth, frightened men trying to hold a fractured world together. But in their desperate quest to forge a unified, orthodox doctrine, a single, unbreakable narrative to unite a crumbling empire, they inevitably had to build walls. And walls, by their very nature, are designed to keep things out. I can almost see the political maneuvering, the fierce debates over what constituted truth, and the slow, methodical drawing of boundaries that turned alternative philosophical perspectives into dangerous heresies. They craved order, hierarchy, and a standardized faith that could be managed and dispensed by an earthly authority. In doing so, they cast a long, cold shadow over the esoteric and the mystical. The subjective, unpredictable nature of personal revelation was simply too dangerous for an institution that demanded obedience. Books were burned, voices were silenced, and the vibrant, kaleidoscopic landscape of early spiritual thought was violently pruned into a single, straight line. The melancholy I feel when contemplating this era is not born of anger, but of a quiet grief for the spiritual diversity that was forcefully exiled into the darkness, leaving generations to inherit a framework that demanded faith in an external authority rather than trust in their own inner light. Despite centuries of being buried beneath both literal sand and metaphoric dogma, that exiled mysticism has finally found its way back to us, demanding to be felt once more. Standing here in the modern age, surrounded by the noise of a world that often feels entirely disconnected from the sacred, the return of these ancient texts feels incredibly deeply personal to me. We are no longer just passive consumers of inherited histories. We are active participants in a grand act of spiritual reclamation. When I read the forgotten words of those early mystics, I do not see a literal roadmap of historical facts, nor do I need them to be a secret code. I see a mirror reflecting my own modern anxieties, my own distrust of rigid institutions, and my own profound yearning for something authentic. The true power of the Nag Hammadi discovery and the exploration of these marginalized philosophical frameworks lies in how they empower us today. They grant us the permission to question, to seek the divine outside the sanctioned walls of orthodoxy, and to trust the quiet voice of our own intuition. It is a deeply emotional realization that the desire for personal empowerment and direct spiritual connection is not a new, modern phenomenon, but an ancient human heartbeat that refused to be silenced. We are picking up the conversation exactly where it was violently interrupted so long ago. By embracing the complexity of our spiritual history, the suppressed alongside the mainstream, we are not just rewriting a narrative, we are healing a very old wound. We are looking back across the centuries, extending our hands to those forgotten seekers in the dust, and finally whispering back to them, "Your spark was not extinguished, and we are still tending to the flame." The unearthing of the Nag Hammadi library in the Egyptian desert was far more than an archaeological triumph. It was a profound spiritual resurrection. For nearly 2 millennia, the deeply personal, mystical insights of early seekers lay buried in the dark, silenced by an institutionalized orthodoxy that prioritized unity, hierarchy, and control over individual revelation. These forgotten philosophers dared to believe that the divine was not an external monarch demanding blind obedience, but a radiant spark residing quietly within the human soul. Their suppression by the early councils represents a tragic narrowing of human spirituality, where the vast, wild landscape of personal illumination was forcefully paved over by rigid dogma. Yet the earth preserved what human institutions sought to destroy. Today, as we hold these fragile echoes of the past, we are reminded that the quest for self-knowledge and an unmediated connection to the universe cannot be permanently extinguished. The resurgence of these texts in our modern era offers a powerful mirror for our own contemporary yearning for authenticity. It empowers us to dismantle the walls of inherited dogma and to reclaim our spiritual autonomy. By embracing these exiled voices, we do not merely correct the historical record, we heal an ancient fracture within the human spirit, reaffirming that the pursuit of personal enlightenment is a timeless, indestructible heartbeat. True spiritual awakening and profound meaning cannot be dictated by external institutions, nor can they be purchased through blind conformity. The ultimate truth of our existence is not a distant authority to be feared, but an intimate, luminous spark hidden within ourselves. While systems of power inevitably crave order and uniformity, the human soul inherently yearns for direct, personal experience. Ignorance of our own inner depths is the only true captivity, and profound self-knowledge is the ultimate liberation. In a world constantly overwhelmed by digital noise, external pressures, and rigid societal expectations, give yourself permission to question the established narratives you have been handed. Cultivate a daily practice of introspection, whether through meditation, journaling, or simply taking a quiet walk in nature, to disconnect from the crowd and reconnect with your inner voice. Trust your own intuition. When seeking your life's purpose, do not wait for an authority figure to hand you the answers. Instead, actively explore your own mind and trust that you already possess the inner light needed to navigate your unique path. Have you ever had a moment where you chose to trust your own inner intuition over the expectations of the crowd, and it turned out to be the right choice? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments section below so we can all explore different perspectives together. Also, if you enjoyed this content, please subscribe to the channel to support our work and give us the motivation to keep creating more inspiring videos for you.